Hello and welcome to The Measure of Whisky, where we discuss all things Scotch whisky. This week I'm going to give you my top picks for bourbon drinkers.
Friday and the race is on. The city's gonna be a mess.
Alright, so first of all, what is the difference between bourbon and Scotch? They look pretty similar to me, but no, there are some pretty major differences. I will highlight the obvious ones for you. First of all, Scotch is produced and matured by law in Scotland. Bourbon, on the other hand, is produced and matured also by law in America. The grain that is used in single malt Scotch whisky, only one grain, it's malted barley, nothing else. Whereas bourbon can have a mixture of grains in the mash bill. However, it has to be 51% corn, so predominantly it is distilled using corn, but that other 49% can be any other grain or wheat. Predominantly it is wheat or rye, depending on what the distiller wants in their final expression. Scotch whisky can be matured in any style of oak barrel. Bourbon has to be matured in a fresh, charred oak barrel. That will have a massive impact on the final expression as well. There are some similarities. Of course, they look very similar. Both of them have to be bottled at a minimum of 40% ABV, alcohol by volume. And both of them are under strict regulations from their owning authorities, shall we say. Right, but what I want to do is I want to provide you with certain Scotch whiskies that I think bourbon drinkers will enjoy. Now let's be honest, the majority of people who drink bourbon on a regular basis, especially if they drink bourbon neat, probably already drink Scotch, right? But maybe you don't. Maybe you are a seasoned bourbon drinker, you've tried Scotch, you didn't like it. What I want to do is I want to give you my suggestions of what I think would be a great starting option for you if you want to get into the world of Scotch whisky. Okay, my first choice for bourbon drinkers, Glenfiddich 14. Glenfiddich is a very traditional Speyside distillery, but it has some of the best experimental cask expressions out there. And I was torn between the 14 and another expression they have called Fire and Cane. But I went for the Glenfiddich 14 because it's matured for 14 years purely in an ex-bourbon barrel. So already there is an element of familiarity for bourbon drinkers there. You're going to get that real vanilla kick right on the nose. It gives a real smooth, sort of easy-going finish to it as well, like the majority of the bourbons out there are. So it's nice and familiar to start with. It doesn't necessarily have the same element of sweetness. You know, the ex-bourbon cask maturation certainly allows for vanillins and a lot of that sort of oaky woody notes, but you don't get the same level of sweetness that you do in a bourbon. That's mainly because the bourbon mash bill has minimum of 51% corn. That's where the sweetness comes from. This is 100% malted barley, and then it's matured in an ex-bourbon cask. But overall, really easy going, nice and smooth, and it does taste and smell quite familiar to some bourbons that are out there on the market. Alright, next on the list we have the Auchentoshan 12. Auchentoshan is a lowland distillery known for its triple distillation. So the reason why I chose this one, the triple distillation makes the dram incredibly smooth and really easy going. It is bottled at 40%, so those bourbon drinkers who are perhaps more keen on something with a bit more of a punch regarding alcohol, you know, this might not be entirely suitable for you, but if you want something that's really easy and really smooth, this is fantastic. Again, it's finished in an ex-bourbon barrel, so you will have that level of vanilla and oak that you still get from your bourbon, but also it's finished in an ex-sherry cask, so it adds a little element of sweetness on the end there, especially on the nose and at the end. The finish on this is a little bit sweet, which is just fantastic. It's not harsh at all, obviously, because it's only 40%, so really smooth, really easy to drink. I also wanted to make sure that I was bringing to the table here Scotch whiskies that are relatively easy to get your hands on, right? The Auchentoshan, you should be able to find that in most places, and of course the Glenfiddich, I'm sure you've seen everywhere. So I wanted to bring some samples here, or some examples that you can go out by yourself, you can try and you can compare to the bourbon that you typically like to drink. But Auchentoshan 12 is a real great example of a good dram for bourbon drinkers. My last Scotch for bourbon drinkers is probably my favourite Scotch. At the moment it certainly is. Next week that might change. It's the Balvenie 17. This is actually my second bottle of the year, and as you can tell, I've been enjoying the Balvenie 17 on a regular basis. There's not much left in that at all. Now, why do I think this is a fantastic Scotch for bourbon drinkers? Well, first of all, it's just phenomenal. I think anybody's going to love this stuff. But 17 years old, it's matured in both ex-bourbon, so you have that oak, you have that vanilla kick in there. It's also matured in ex-Oloroso sherry, not finished in the sherry cask, matured. Look at the colour of that dram. It is phenomenal. So you get the vanilla, you get the oak, you get the incredible sweetness as well. Like, the smell of it is just phenomenal. It is super smooth, super easy going. We're bottled at 43% on this one, so not cask strength, certainly no harshness at all. But the dram itself is just, it's amazing. The mouthfeel is thick, it's viscous, it is so smooth, it's so forgiving, and the complexity to it is just phenomenal. The Balvenie have absolutely nailed this with the marrying of that ex-bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. It's incredible, it's phenomenal. Now, you may have noticed all of the options that I've put forth, every one of them are unpeated. I find that certain people who I speak to, who are bourbon drinkers, will go and try a Scotch and someone's going to offer them an Ardbeg or a Lafroig, and it's just a bit too much. It's just a bit too harsh. That takes a little bit of time to get used to. Not for everyone, but for certain people that can just be a step too far and it turns them off immediately. So my suggestion, certainly, pick a Speyside or pick a Highland malt. Actually, it doesn't matter what region it's from, because you can get Islay whiskies that are unpeated. Just pick something that's unpeated, that's spent a really good amount of time in an ex-bourbon barrel, and if you can get it, one that's been either finished or matured in an ex-sherry cask, because it brings that element of sweetness into the end of it. So if you're a bourbon drinker, do you have a favourite Scotch? Let me know. Till next time, Slange.
Friday and the race is on. This city's gonna be